David, welcome to the Without Limits podcast.
Thank you for having me.
I'm excited for this one. You're obviously over for the next few days as we are announcing you as our new head of performance programming. So that is incredibly exciting for myself, for the team, and hopefully for yourself. And using this opportune moment actually to get a podcast in. Now, I'm sat opposite someone who not only is 6'2" and 110 kilos, which is everything I wanted to be growing up, but you've reached dizzy heights in sport. Across a couple of different domains, right? In terms of elite CrossFitter, competed at the games, now applying a trade in powerlifting. And this podcast is all about interviewing high performers, people that are on the edge of performance, whether that be in sport, in their career, in business, in entertainment. And my opportunity to sit opposite these types of people and learn from them is something that I'm very grateful for. So this podcast is going to probably take a number of different twists and turns. We'll need to set the scene for the first half of it, but then I'm going to be digging into your kind of mindset and your attitude towards competing, training, and life. Your reputation precedes you in conversations I've had with people prior to giving you an offer to come and work for us was all super positive. And so, I'm looking forward to the next hour or so, just getting to dive into some of this stuff. But before I do, I always ask the guest, what does Without Limits mean to them? It's our tagline. It's the name of this podcast. And hopefully it's a couple of words that get your mind thinking a little bit. So what does Without Limits mean to you?
Well, first of all, thank you for that very, very nice introduction. We can get into, I don't agree with with some of the things you said there, but I think we'll probably get into the reasons why with regard to like achievement and fulfilling potential, like reaching the highest levels. But with what does Without Limits mean to me, I would say something I've definitely fallen victim to or done throughout my career is set limits on myself in terms of what I think I'm capable of doing. And that's even within mind, like having a good work ethic, paying attention to detail, like leaving no stone unturned in my pursuit to be the best athlete that I could possibly be. I still felt like I put a cap on what I was able to do. And I see this in other athletes as well. And I think it's a little bit of that putting that limitation on yourself. Then even if you do work really hard and even if you are trying to get the absolute most out of yourself, if you set the limit, you subconsciously never really do perform potentially to your full potential because you're telling yourself what you are capable of, as opposed to working and leaving your mind open enough to explore what your body is actually capable of. A very, very good coach in the CrossFit space, who I won't say because I don't like to name drop, but said something recently that I really liked. And he said, instead of when you're picking up, and this is quite specific to a workout, instead of picking a pace or saying like, this is the score that I can get in this workout, pick a pace that is challenging for you, that really, really pushes you, and then let your body tell you what it's capable of instead of deciding what it's capable of and then making it perform to that level. So I think Without Limits to me would be to not put the self-imposed, not employ like self-imposed limits, but to work hard, do all of the things that you need to do to pay attention to the details that need to be paid attention to, and then explore and find out what your limit is. And then I think that's a much better way of actually discovering your true potential.
It's very easy, like with perspective, right? Either like maybe at the stage where you're at, where you're kind of looking back at your career and looking at ways in which maybe you put that limiting belief or glass ceiling on yourself, or the coach that's kind of got to that stage of mastery now where they can be very open in terms of their coaching practice. When you're in the eye of the storm as an athlete or as a coach or in any domain of life, like how do you gain that level of perspective short of listening to a podcast like this and going out, maybe I should think a little bit differently about this workout? But to the example there about being in tune with what your body's telling you in that workout, we hear about this kind of auto-regulation, 100% just on that given day, and not really just succumbing to the data or the objectivity about what you feel is you should be doing in that workout. How do you unlock that in the moment? Because it does require either requires mastery or to master oneself, which usually comes with maturity, experience, hindsight, and perspective after the fact.
So I think you've several other things there, which is experience. I think that is a very important part of it. experience in terms of obviously experience training, but also experience within competition as well. I think that not trying to wait until you can be at your absolute best every single time you compete all the way through your career, which it's unlikely that's ever going to happen. Like, you're going to have some good competitions, some bad competitions, but every competition is going to contribute to your development. It's going to tell you more about yourself as a person and an athlete. So getting that experience through competing is very important. Getting the experience through putting the hours in the gym is very important as well, obviously. But I think a big part of it is also a bit more of a focus on the journey as opposed to the destination. I think when you put those limits in place, you are looking beyond the present of where you are right now, doing the workout, doing the lift in the middle of the training cycle, to the end of it, and telling yourself what you are capable of achieving at the end. If you focus more on the process, enjoying the process, being present in the process, and engaging with what's happening now, that end point is no longer in your mind. You're instead focusing on making the absolute most of what's happening now, which is then going to lead to the best end point that could be. So I think that's a huge part of it is focusing on the process.
You used that sort of term there, enjoying the process. I've heard you talk in the past about you maybe struggling to find enjoyment and fun in the process. Again, unpack that a little bit. What were your experiences? We're kind of jumping to your experiences without setting the scene here, but I knew this would happen. What your experiences of the process? Let's use CrossFit. Your time in that sport. You're someone who's incredibly disciplined and probably leans more into the discipline than the enjoyment of the process. What were your experiences like?
So that's exactly what you just said there. The discipline and enjoyment. And I think this probably stems back from childhood, as many things do. And I had parents that were very encouraging of a high achievement within education, and also very disciplined within the household and around school and taking care of responsibilities. And I obviously, when you're younger, you often rebel against that. You don't like it, but I'm so appreciative of that now, because growing up in that level of discipline, and kind of like a long-sightedness and being considerate of how hard work now and delaying gratification now, how well that's going to serve you in the future. Like, understanding that from a young age has really helped me with being able to be more successful as an athlete later on. But I think the downside of that was that I automatically thought that in order for me to reach my full potential within anything that I'm doing, the more discipline I can instill, like there's like a correlation between how much discipline I can instill and how good I'm going to be at what I'm doing. And enjoyment was not really a factor within that. And I almost saw it as if I enjoy it, like, it's a nice bonus, but the enjoyment is not really something that I'm looking for. And if I'm disciplined enough, I shouldn't need to enjoy it. I can just ride discipline all the way to success. And as I got further through my career, the enjoyment got less and less. And then the reliance on the discipline got more and more. And the downside of discipline is that it's not unlimited, and it takes effort, and it takes like consistent, persistent effort to keep yourself disciplined. Whereas enjoyment just comes naturally. Like, you don't have to. You never hear anyone say like, "Oh, I need to stop now. I've had too much fun." So if you can get more out of enjoying the process and focusing on, again, being in the present, like enjoying what you were doing, because I initially did the sport because I enjoyed it, then I think that would have served me better, because I would have been able to stay in the, not necessarily stay in the sport for longer, but I would have been able to enjoy more of what I was doing, because I was focused more on the present and just like having fun within the training and focusing on the process, than using discipline to get through that, to work harder, because I was so focused on the end goal being that I have to reach this level, I have to get this score in this workout, I have to qualify for this competition.
Seems very easy in sort of practice, or in principle, just to have the mindset of, this idea of work and play. But again, your story is quite similar to mine, but how do you unlock that? Because I would always lean into discipline, and I probably still do now. And it's only with a level of, like I say, hindsight, perspective, maturity, and probably just being afforded in a different place in life that I can start to apply play into things that we used to require discipline. Because one, I'm more adapted to the task that I'm trying to perform, and also I suppose I've got the perception now that even if I fail or learn, I can still overcome and go back and try again. Whereas in the past, let's say in using a business to put context to this, it was always like all or nothing, in which case it's hard to find fun and play when it's something's all or nothing, because the risk is that you associate with it is so high, like you're going to lose everything. A bit like in CrossFit, it's a sport that like it requires 24/7 thinking, 365, but the rewards are sometimes hard to come by, whether it's prize money, the contracts with the brands and whatever else. And so just to see it as fun, maybe in the early days when you're just going and training, that's fun. When it becomes a job or a career, it's hard to find the fun. So is there anything that you think that you can set yourself up as a young athlete, maybe listen to this, or someone going to take something on that maybe initially requires discipline, but they're going to show the discipline because they find enjoyment in that thing without losing that enjoyment? What could they be thinking about? Or is it just the nature of the beast, and actually it's once the sets and reps have been done that you can apply more enjoyment?
I think when you first get into doing a sport, most people, it's going to be enjoyment. That's your main driver. The more your livelihood relies on that sport, and the more, I suppose, the more professional you have to conduct yourself day to day within practice and everything else, the more you're going to have to do things within the sport that you don't enjoy. And if you're lucky, you'll just enjoy every aspect of the sport, every part of the grind, and then you're in for like a very long and probably fulfilling career. But for most of us, there are going to be things within that sport that we don't enjoy doing. So part of it is that you just have to, like you say, it's the nature of the beast. You just have to suck it up and get the work done that needs to be done. But I think a key thing for me, looking back now, that a key thing that would have been helpful for me to keep the enjoyment up would be to register, acknowledge all of the small successes. So a bit like you've alluded to there, like when you are focused on high performance and when you have like very lofty goals, it's very easy to, like, things that are bad, like they need to get better. Things that are good are not good because you're a professional. They're supposed to be good. So there's nothing to give yourself a pat on the back about. So you just end up with, no matter if you do poorly or if you do well, there's just a constant pessimistic level of negativity throughout the training process, right? And instead of, and I think that for me, the reason why I was like that was I thought to myself, if I acknowledge that I'm doing something well, then either consciously or subconsciously, I'm then going to cut myself too much slack. I'm not going to work hard enough because now I've done something well. I've given myself like a little bit more of the leash, like I can chill out a bit now. Well, realistically, looking back, like that wasn't going to happen. Right? I naturally work hard. I wanted to do better. If I'd just acknowledged all of those small successes along the way, it not only would not have derailed me, it would have helped me stay on track because it would have kept me in a positive mindset. It would have kept me registering like, oh, I'm improving in this and this and this, which then would have given me more back from it. I would have enjoyed it more, and that would have provided more fuel and made it easier to continue pushing and keep going. So I think, again, not looking too far ahead into the future at the goal, but actually being in the present and registering all of the small successes is a key thing to keeping your enjoyment in the sport and keeping like the drive and the fuel to keep on going, and then therefore allowing enjoyment in the process to be more of your fuel instead of just relying on discipline and saving discipline for when you need it for that stuff that you don't like.
If you could have your time again, how would that manifest? How would you recognize those small wins? Would it be in journaling, showing gratitude at the end of the day?
So something that I actually, I worked with Emma, my partner, Emma Tool. She has worked with some mental coaches in sports mental coaches in the past, and I also worked with one of the ones that she worked with because of the success that she had. And one of the key things that we found was to write down like say journaling, something at the end of the day. And it's quite a small action, but it has a big impact over time. And that was just writing down 3 things at the end of every day that I could see as a success, like a small like pat on the back of like, I did this well today. And in the beginning, it's very difficult because especially if you're very hard on yourself, as I said before, the things that are bad, and the things that are good are not special because you're supposed to be doing them well. So you write down things like, I did my session today. Of course I did my session today, but what else was I supposed to do? And then it will be like, oh, I matched this lift from so many months ago. And maybe it was like, I didn't want to do this piece, but I was disciplined enough and made myself like do this piece at an intensity that I didn't want to push to today. And it becomes like, it starts off as like very mediocre things that are not very special. And then over time, you stop being so stubborn with yourself. You start actually registering the things that you are doing well. And the more you do it, the more you realize like, wow, I am actually getting these small successes every day. And if I didn't sit down and really think about this, I wouldn't register them. I would just continue going on. And then when something goes bad, you then catastrophize because nothing has gone well for months because you've just ignored all the things you were doing well. So I think that taking notes, sitting down, you hear people talk about it in terms of taking time to feel gratitude and be thankful for the things that are in your life. And when you're an athlete and everything revolves around your sport, it's very difficult to step out of that and look at the rest of your life and be thankful for things there, because although they are there, they don't matter as much. You know, like you don't register like the health of all of your like friends and loved ones as being a really nice thing, because all you care about is getting to the next stage of competition. You don't care about the fact that you live in like warmth and comfort. You have food, you have clean water, you have a bed to sleep on, a roof over your head. Like you live in a first world country where you are relatively safe and disease free. You don't register all of these things as being important because for you, they're like a standard of living. And your goal is just performing in your sport. So taking time away, like to just pull yourself out of being the athlete and look at the other aspects of your life and be thankful for those, is also something else that I think would have been better if I spent more time doing. And now when those aspects of my life have become a bit bigger and more important to me because I'm moving on to that next stage of life, even now within training, if things don't go well, I'm like, it's fine. I'm going to go home to Emma soon. Like we're going to be moving to a new house soon. We're moving on to the next stage of life. We've got so much other nice stuff that's going on. If I don't make this lift, like it's not a big deal. And lo and behold, what happens? Next week I come back, I feel better, and I'm back on track.
Yeah, that's so powerful. I think you referenced their sort of childhood, and I've spoken to this many times on various different podcasts, but you know, I was the sort of person, if I came back and got 9 out of 10, my dad would be like, well, you didn't get 10. So it is something that's like ingrained in you from a young age. And so my ability to show gratitude for anything was like non-existent. It wasn't until I was around Jens, actually, who again had seen a sports psychologist and a mindset coach. And he was starting to say to me, you know, you need to sit and actually reflect on what you've achieved, or if there was a key moment in business or in training or something that had happened. He's like, he'd ask me like, how do you feel about that? I'd be like, I don't know. Don't feel anything. He's like, you've got to like think about it. So it really is powerful, and I think many people believe it, or like us that believe it to be a little bit woo-woo. When you actually sit and practice it, the benefits certainly compound. I think the other thing to maybe register is like, yeah, in a sport like CrossFit, which is so highly competitive and does require 24/7 thinking, whether it's the training, the recovery, the nutrition, all of it. It requires that level of discipline, and often if you're battling against super talented athletes or whatever else, is like even further, you've got to keep pushing yourself, and you can't really think about taking your foot off the gas. And I think that becomes doubly negative when away from the sport. So in those pockets throughout your day, if you're constantly then up at that level again, where you're thinking about, I remember when I first started the business, and again, I've spoken to this story before, but I applied everything into rugby to really try and eke out every bit of potential that I had. I wasn't naturally the fastest, the biggest, the fittest, but I was diligent on every level. When I came into building the business, I applied just the same intensity that I had done to rugby as an athlete to like building a business, but I didn't know the rules of the game, right? So I didn't know when I wasn't, delivering sessions, for example, or in the gym, how to conduct myself out of the gym. So it was just full 110% effort into everything in life and no switch off. So I think to the point about applying fun to discipline, it wasn't until I was able to find fun or switch off and bring myself into a different state away from work that I was able to then find this bit of balance. And I think, again, something with perspective now, it's able to find those pockets throughout your day where you're not on at that level. Was there anything that you were able to do, any practice or routines or rituals away from competing? Because you're training for 6-7 hours of the day to try and switch off. And how did your mindset, as someone who is extremely disciplined and probably always thinking about the next session or work, was there anything that you experienced in that kind of context?
Yes. I love how these questions are like leading towards the exact, like you've nailed the exact answer within the question, and now I get to just build on it. And something that I try and do more now, and that I did try and do later on in my career as well, was to also take time away from the training and the nutrition and the work and everything else, and just sit down in quiet. I suppose you could call it meditation, but it's more taking time to just sit away from like noise and specific thoughts about what's coming up next, and be present and just reflect on how everything is going and how you feel, and again, what has gone well, and if things haven't gone well, not ignoring them, like pretending they don't exist, because you know they exist, you want to do better, but then thinking of okay, logically, what's the next step for me to do here to make this better? But I think when you're, like you say, when the training volume is so high, and especially when it's not a sport where many people can live off of the sport. So I myself, I was always working alongside competing, whether that be like a programming for within like a company, or programming for individual athletes. Even besides also working with sponsors, like I always wanted to have a source of income that I was in control of, as opposed to being fully reliant on sponsors. And I think that was just my own maybe lack of trust because the sport is so young and companies don't necessarily act as, should we say, professionally as say bigger companies and bigger sports do. I didn't want to rely solely on that as my income. But then that also meant that I had to take more time away from my day to work. So at times when other athletes might be resting and recovering and switching off between sessions, I was then at the desk working. And so my day really was like bang, 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 jam-packed. And looking back now, if I'd done more of taking time away from the work, from the trainings, to just sit down and decompress, it probably would have brought my just like general level down to a bit more of a relaxed state, which then would have meant that all of the times that I was in that high state, it would be more manageable. But then also when it got to the end of the day and I needed to sleep and relax, it would have been much easier to get back down to that state as well. And then the overall effect on my stress and well-being would have been better too.
We'll talk more about that. And like I say, we've jumped a few steps here, but I don't want to make the whole podcast about you. As I said to you before we started, CrossFit being a whole identity, because I know there's much more to David Shorunke than just CrossFit. But how did you describe your athletic journey into it? How did you get into CrossFit? Because most people come into it from a weightlifting or gymnastics background. I don't expect you to have had much of a gymnastics or necessarily weightlifting background, given the size of you. I was at university. I'd done lots of sport growing up. My main sport when I was probably from around 12 to 18 was basketball. And then when I realized that I wasn't going to make it to the NBA, unfortunately, I started, I played basketball just for fun. But around that time, they had a company called London Youth Rowing, which do scouting for UK rowing squads, British rowing. They were going around to different schools and they do tests on the rowing machines. And I think I was just in the gym at the time that they were doing a test for another group of people. And the guy saw me and saw that I was quite tall and said, "Do you want to hop on and do this 1K test and see what you get?" And I did well. And so he invited me over to a youth development club in East London where I lived. And slowly I started to get into rowing, and I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed because it's the actual act of rowing or sculling is quite technical, but once you get that stroke down, because it's just repeating the same motion over and over again, a lot of it is down to just fitness. And I love that because there was a correlation between if I work hard, I get faster, and there aren't too many other things in the way of that process. And so I competed in rowing for about, I think 1 or 2 years. And then that got me into Oxford Brookes University, where I studied sports science and rowed there as well.
And then I started to get, as I was nearing like the end of my degree, I've always wanted to do something physical. And to me, it was either sports or something else that I really wanted to do was go into the military. So when I was nearing the end of my degree, I applied to go into the Royal Marines. And I was accepted onto the officers training course. And but I realized that the volume of running that they need to be able to do even from the start is quite tough. And if I don't just want to be stuck in PT for in and out of PT for most of the training process, I'm going to have to be able to run a lot faster, and also tolerate the volume of running. So as every like intelligent person does, I just like jumped my running volume way up without no gradual increase. Got an injury to my knee, and then was not able to go in at the date of my entry. And what they do is they've got entry once a year for officers, but you can go in every month as just enlisted. So I decided to defer my entry to the next year, or go in in a few months' time and then rehab my knee. And I rehabbed the knee, and it got much better. And around that time was when CrossFit was starting to gain quite a lot of popularity, especially within the UK. And I think this is around 2014, maybe 2015. And so I saw CrossFit could be a good way to actually test my knee to see if it was ready for the rigors of the basic training. So I started to do some CrossFit workouts, just like pick and choosing bits off of the internet, off of main site and YouTube. And as the more I did it, the more I enjoyed it. Ended up going down to a CrossFit club to be able to do the training a bit better. And there I ran into Simon Greenwood, who was doing CrossFit I think he was working at a CrossFit box, so he had his own CrossFit box then. And he recommended that I do the Open. Now, at this point, I wasn't really too bothered about CrossFit. I wasn't really too bothered about competing in it, but I thought I'm already doing the training, I might as well. Anyway, I did the Open, qualified for regionals, went to regionals, came 11th, and about 6 months after starting CrossFit, I was 11th in Europe, and suddenly another door to a career being active had opened. And that door meant that I didn't necessarily have to be away from my girlfriend at the time or my family for months at a time and put my life in danger, which as a youth, you don't really consider so much. You just think about the action and the fun. But it was something that I did think about. So I decided to not go and take the entry into the Royal Marines, and I could do that later on if I wanted to, and pursue the route of CrossFit. And it went well. I got better, more competitions, raised through the ranks, and it carried on from there.
The career into the military is I suppose, is paved out a little bit. It's quite, you can kind of see it in terms of the different stages and also the remuneration. It's fairly controlled. What did a career in CrossFit, or what did you perceive a career in CrossFit in 2014, 2015 to be like?
I think there wasn't much perception of the career beyond this, just an opportunity for me to earn a living whilst being physically active. And I still had that competitive drive from basketball and from rowing, because the university I was at was extremely competitive with rowing. Like half the people on the squad had been to Olympics, that had Olympic medals. Like it was a direct feeder for GB rowing. So all the way through, like as I was going through basketball and then rowing, like my competitive drive and the drive to not only be good but to be the best was being like fostered more and more. So when I got into CrossFit, I already had that, like, I really want to compete, I want to be the best. And I suppose that's an aspect of the military as well. That's the reason why I applied to the Royal Marines, because I saw that as being, that's an entry into what would be a more like elite aspect of the military, to if I could then potentially go on to even being in like SBS after that. And so when I was looking at it, I wasn't necessarily looking at as I can make a career off of this that's going to make me money. It was more a case of I can get enough money off of doing this if I complement it with coaching at a box, that I can then fulfill my passion for competing whilst being able to live. And then as it moves through, the coaching on the side obviously takes up time, and so you have to look a bit more into sponsorship and working with companies and endorsements so that you can actually fund your own competing, because unlike a lot of other sports, it's not funded by the government. There's no like national governing body that's paying for you to go to training camps or whatnot, or you're not getting like paid a salary to play on a team, something like that. So then the money started to become a little bit more of an aspect of it. And because the sport is so young, and like I said before about the companies, I think contracts aren't necessarily so secure and so long standing that for many people they can afford to not worry about income.
You're clearly, at that age, a gifted athlete, and you clearly have the discipline, the mindset, as we've alluded to. What did the sport look like then? In terms of not necessarily the workouts, but what are the kind of characteristics of the sport back then? I probably became more familiar with it in 2017, 2018. And what were you particularly good at? What did you enjoy most?
Rowing, obviously. I think the sport, if it's easy to maybe compare it to how it is now, slightly lower skill, potentially more, say, the destructive is quite an extreme word, but workouts that were, a lot of competitions featured workouts that were really not so much about testing performance as much as just survival.
Resilience.
Resilience. Like who can get through a weekend of competition, and who can pace themselves well enough to get through a weekend of competition. And that was actually somewhere where there's an area that I did really well. And I think that was maybe from the endurance aspect of rowing, that on the Friday I would have a slow start. On the Saturday, which was like named moving day, I would start to do better and rise on the leaderboard. And then on the Sunday, when other people were suffering, was usually when I would start to excel, because I would be able to keep the same effort, the same paces as from the Friday and Saturday, which I think probably comes from the resilience and the endurance of rowing. So definitely lower skill, a lot more like grindy, tough, hard workouts and weekends of competition.
How did you know? So you mentioned that you're picking up coaching jobs on the side. I know that even typically now, many CrossFitters will either own a box, or they'll coach on the side, or they'll have their own program, etc. Some will kind of break free and be able to go full time and be looked after by sponsorships and things. But I suppose it's kind of each their own, right, in terms of the lifestyle they want to try and live. And as you've alluded to, having a bit of I guess a safety blanket that you're working on something that's you can own as well. How did you know you were ready to go full time? And what does it look like from going like a recreational CrossFit athlete to going full time? And the reason I find these questions so interesting to hear is, to the untrained eye, I don't get it anymore, but back in I started the gym in 2016. Between 2016 and 2020, I never did CrossFit training, but there was elements of it that looked like CrossFit. And I would have so many people message me going, and they were genuinely asking, when do you think you'll get to the games? Or when are you going to compete against Fraser? Or what do you reckon you get on this workout if Fraser got this? Because they just have no comprehension, right, of the levels associated with it. They just see some guy in a gym doing some ski erg and, a couplet of whatever, and they see someone else do it, and they're like, oh, that looks like that. It's a bit like having no comprehension of racing Usain Bolt, like how much you'd get beat by. What was that transition of good CrossFit athlete going to full time, and what does the change in lifestyle look like in terms of hours committed to training, etc.?
So in 2014 was when I did the first regionals. And at that time, then after that was when I got a coaching job at CrossFit Cheltenham and was training. I can't remember how many hours, but I was still coaching, like say 2 to 3 hours a day, and then also programming on the side of that. So the training was maybe like 3 to 4 hours a day. And then in 2016, I moved to Sweden to be part of Team Nordic OPEX. And at that point, you all had to be based at the same box from the beginning of the season in order to qualify as a team. And then we had secured I suppose a sponsorship from the gym. We didn't pay gym membership. We had like a few other like local sponsors that then meant I could work a bit less and then contribute more time to training. But I was still programming on the side, and I was still coaching on the side. So maybe training it up to like maybe 4 to 5 hours a day. Then as time went on from about 2016 up to 2020, I pretty much was still, I'd say, working each day about three hours a day, and then training probably close to around 5 to 6 hours a day. And that's also like including like warm-ups, cool downs, all of like the skill work and stuff like that. And then on top of that, obviously like the nutritional aspect of like preparing meals, preparing supplements and all the other stuff that goes into being an athlete. it was only in 2020, I think 2022, that I actually decided to actively take a step back from working and say, I am going to make an effort now to partner with some brands that I believe in and believe in me enough to have a deal, a relationship, and do less work and focus more on training. And by that point, I was maybe working closer to around, say, 2 hours a day, and then training closer to probably like 6 hours a day. But that's as close as it got to maybe being like full time. And that is also 7 days a week. Like, it's not like you work 5 days and you got 2 days off. That's like 7 days a week, working around just over 2 hours, training probably about 5 to 6 hours. And then the days off is the days when obviously you've still got like chores around the house that need to be done, got more work to catch up on potentially. So I've never actually been a full-time athlete where I've only worked with endorsements and deals, or been fortunate enough to have like a sponsor that takes care of like most of my income. I've always had that part that I am in control of.
You were 32 at that stage, 2022?
Yeah, I think so.
Is that quite late? Or is that peak?
I'm not really sure, because I felt like I did consistently I got better throughout my career, and I definitely felt better throughout my career as well. And although I think my performance increased, but I don't know where the peak, I mean, peak would probably be like, I don't know, when's the last time I went qualified for the game? I went to the game 2023. But it's difficult to even, because you say like CrossFit involves so many things, it's difficult to define a peak. Like, was a peak when I was younger and I was a little bit more resilient and I would PB like every other month, or was peak like 8 years later when I've figured out actually what works for my body and I can get more out of training and I have less injuries and I generally feel better in my body because I've worked these things out and I've gained more experience and I've reached a higher level of competition.
Do you have any regret? Regrets is a strong word, but do you have any regrets then in terms of like always having that, I guess, a safety blanket of doing the program on the side? Do you think if you went all in and really pushed your chips in, maybe financially you would have been necessarily in the position you're in now, but maybe you give you another 10% in terms of performance? And the reason I ask that is because hybrid fitness or fitness competition now, High Rocks, etc., like the opportunities for athletes, CrossFit, High Rocks, like that wasn't there 10 years ago. It was just CrossFit if you want to be a competitive fitness athlete. Now you've got the influencer athlete able to pick up the kind of endorsements and live like an athlete, but maybe not they can't perform at the level, and that's absolutely fine. And then you've got the athletes that some of them are commercial, some of them not so much, but they can perform at the level, and there's opportunity. Again, someone who's kind of been there and done it, would you suggest pushing your chips in, going all in, would have got more from the performance? Or do you think having both sides of the coin and be able to build something that has a bit more longevity was the right way to go about it?
So I think the answer to this is quite, I've thought about this, is quite complex, because I think there is what would have been good for me as the person that I was then, what I actually did, what would have been best as the person that I was then. And then if I'd also made the other changes that we've spoken about so far, what would have then been best for me. And so in that situation where I put a huge amount of pressure on myself and I was very disciplined, I think if I had gone all in on the competing without that, say, safety blanket, it would have, like, that pressure would have then, with the necessity to perform, because I've now not got another like reliable form of income, would have compounded and probably led to a worse performance, because now I've pushed all my chips in. All the negatives are catastrophic, and all of the positives are even less important, because you have to now perform to this level, because this is now all you do. So I think it was maybe the right thing for me to do, but I probably could have pushed a little bit more towards not working on the side and going all in as an athlete. I think if I'd made the other changes that I should have made, which were to like focus a little bit more on the process and find enjoyment in the process and acknowledge the positives, then that would have taken some of the pressure off. I would have enjoyed the process more. And then you combine that with going all in and believing in yourself, and again, not putting a limitation on what you can achieve, then that would have been the best way for me to go about things. And you can see that now as the sport has moved on and more companies have got involved with it, and it's grown beyond what like just the CrossFit Games itself to other huge events that are also growing, like WFP, like other like Waterpalooza, Dubai, Rogue Fitness, like the Rogue Invitational. There's so many other big competitions where athletes can make a living. That then also means that there are other companies and other sponsorship opportunities that mean that athletes can take this more seriously and go full-time earlier. There's good and bad sides to that, but it definitely means that it's more opportunity now to do this full-time than there was then. And the level of the sport has gradually risen since then as well. And I think a factor of that is the fact that people have the means now to go in full-time and train full-time and get all the benefits of that and then improve such. I also think that looking at the demographic of the elite CrossFitter, I am far taller and naturally heavier than 99% of CrossFit athletes. I think I'm the tallest, in combination, the tallest and heaviest person to ever have gone to the CrossFit Games, which says something about like what is the ideal body type for the sport. So
that's a gangster stat.
And I don't think like you've got very tall athletes, like most obviously Brent Fikowski is a tiny bit shorter than me, and then like Yele Hoste, Chad McKay was a big one when I was competing as well. And then you've got slightly heavier athletes who aren't as tall, but like in combination, I was probably a body type that was not ideal for the sport. So while I do feel like if I'd made some changes, there would have been things that I could have been better. I also think I was quite good at potentially like finding ways around like the many areas in which I lacked because I've got like a greater range of motion to cover, or my body weight would naturally sit higher, and thus therefore it's just more work for the body to have to perform all of the tasks. So it's a bit of different things for like what would have worked for me then versus what would have worked for the ideal me had I made the changes.
You reached the games in 2023. You just mentioned. We're now in 2025.
Yeah.
And you no longer CrossFit or compete in CrossFit.
Nope.
That seems quite strange. Can you unpack that?
I think so. As I said earlier, as I was moving through the sport, I enjoyed it less and less because of the pressure I was putting on myself, but also a lot of the nonsense and the crap that comes with a company that doesn't often have the athletes' best interests or even the development of the sports as their primary concern, but finances. That has a lot of trickle-down effects. And so I was gradually losing love for the sport because of my own enjoyment and these other things. And then in 2024, a friend and competitor, Lazar Dukic, drowned at the CrossFit Games during the swim event. And anyone who has looked at CrossFit within the last year, and like you've no doubt heard about this, but it was it's referred to as an accident, but it's more a case of the result of negligence. The correct safety protocols were nowhere in place, and when he was drowning, there was about 50 meters from the shoreline, in full view of spectators and on the live stream, there was no one there to help him. No lifeguards, nothing. And after this happened, it felt like at the time that once you get beyond the actual, like once you comprehend what has happened and you get beyond like the grief and the loss of a fellow competitor and a friend and a human being, your mind then moves to surely something must come of this. Surely the changes that we have been wanting as athletes for years, where CrossFit prioritize athlete safety over finances, over spectatorship, like how good it looks, how good it is to watch on a live stream. Surely those requests are going to now be listened to, and changes are going to be made, and changes have been made minimally, if at all. And I think after that happened, and then how the CrossFit Games then reacted to it and essentially just tried to brush it under the mat, ignore it, distract you with other things, look at our new competition schedule. Here, we're going to give you the results of the investigation. we don't have any results. But don't worry about that. We've got a new structure for the season of competition. This kind of like their modus operandus of denial and then distraction. Here's a pretty thing to look at, so you don't think about this terrible thing that's happened. And then lots of other things that happened along that process with the PFAA who advocate on behalf of the athletes, wanted to see the investigation. They demanded specific things, changes that the athletes wanted that were in the interest of the athletes and thus in the interest of the longevity of the sport, were completely ignored. It again added to that feeling of what I am getting out of this sport and versus what it costs me is not worth it anymore. And so I decided that I just didn't want to compete in the sport anymore. And I still I go with, obviously with Emma at the competitions, and I still like being in the environment because I like the athletes and I like the energy and I like I miss maybe the competitive aspect of the sport. But I don't feel the drive anymore to do the day-to-day grind training that's necessary to be at that level, because I don't feel like the reward that it gives me anymore is worth it.
Yeah, that's very fair. Do you think if the sort of challenger competitions, WFP you mentioned, I mean, they've only just come on the scene, do you think if they're a little bit more mature in their life cycle, it would give someone like yourself, who obviously feels rightly so very strongly about the events that have happened and your own experiences with athlete safety and I guess athlete welfare, and actually just a distribution of the money that CrossFit's been able to make over the years. If WFP and these other outlets were a little bit further down the track, you'd stay in it, because I know you're 35, so you're probably in your twilight years. That's fair to say. But for someone who's such a diligent, hardworking competitor and has been for 10 years, we'll talk about the powerlifting pivot, but that's a big body of work and a big period of your life to be able to just walk away from. If there was other outlets and ways to compete, would you have stayed in?
I think if they had been there at that time, or maybe even earlier on, probably, yeah. I probably would have wanted to do it just to explore what could this new way of competing, this new competition schedule be like, if it really does listen to the athletes. And from what I've seen so far, especially their first tour stage in Indianapolis, they do. They've made some brilliant changes to how competitions are run, to everything from how the athletes are welcomed when they first get to the competition. They are treated like the professionals that they are. It's the first time I've seen, not the first time, one of the few competitions so far, Rogue Invitation also does quite a good job of this, where the professionalism with which athletes conduct their own training and day-to-day and how they see themselves is matched by the competition itself. Athlete safety is prioritized. The athletes are listened to, feedback is received, they talk about it within themselves, and then they report back to the athletes on what they think about the feedback. It feels like a proper communication. And so I think if that had been around at that time, I probably would have, at the very least, given it a try. And because that would have potentially quenched the thirst for something that was better or different to how we were being treated or how the things were being run by CrossFit Games. But then there still would have been that aspect that was just down to me, which was about learning to enjoy the process and acknowledging the positives and having that balance of enjoyment and discipline. And if I hadn't solved that, it probably would have still led to where I am now, but maybe a bit later on.
Yeah, that's fair. And the reason I ask mainly is because I'm involved heavily in athletics as a competition. We often talk about how we attract the best athletes in the world, and it's who are the best athletes in the world? And it always brings us back to competitive CrossFit athletes, the people that have competed at the games. I think in terms of a broad skill set and ability to compete across a number of different domains, you guys still have that above everyone else, and to a large degree. And so thinking about you as the athlete in 2023, having watched a lot of your journey, watched a lot of your training as well, I think in terms of a pin-up poster boy that I would love to have looked and emulated, it would have been you. For you to kind of walk away from that, like I say, for all the right reasons, it kind of feels like a shame. I know you've found your calling now in powerlifting, but to be such an animal across, like I say, all those different domains is it's a really tough place to get to at that level, and to be able to harness that and then redirect into something else would have been really cool to see.
Thank you very much. That's very nice of you to say. I know what you mean. It's like, it's so many hours, so much time is spent like crafting or like building something that you then essentially like shelf. You don't really need like most of it. You just take a little bit.
Seeing a 6'2" weapon, like I remember and I loved the bit where it's like, I see you at work, like everything just spoke to me. Like seeing you be able to do all that stuff, whether it was going from heavy barbell cleans into rope climbs, into runs, into whatever it may be, like seeing just a finely tuned athlete to that level who's competed at the games, like that's the pinnacle. To shut it off for the right reasons, again, I can completely get on board with. But as someone who enjoys seeing other people's athletic potential and seeing them express that in competition, and also being involved in fitness for the best part of 2 decades, knowing what it takes to get to the level you were at, and also my experiences with walking away from rugby, so I can kind of see it on both sides, because I got to the stage where I was like, I'm done with this now, I'm out for other reasons, but completely went cold turkey. I just love to have seen you still fucking go at it.
I would love to do that, but it just didn't. I think there was the grind of training was it was as tough for me as it is for anyone, but the pressure that I put on top of myself to perform made it tougher than it needed to be, which then creates more fatigue. It just wears you down over time. And then the fact that I'm just not, as I started to get later on in my career, like I every now and then I would like make excuses like, oh, like I'm just like, I'm too tall or like, too heavy, like every now and then, and it would be like a momentary thought before I'd snap out of it and basically like just stop being a bitch. Like, it is what it is. You are how you are. Like, you chose to do this sport. Like, suck it up and do what needs to be done or leave. But then as I started to get to the end of my career, I started to actually pay attention to these things more in terms of like, less in terms of like, it's an excuse, but more in terms of like, okay, I am bigger than everyone else. What does that mean? What do I need to work more on? What do I need to work less on? And that was actually helpful, because then I was able to put more specific work into the areas that I was potentially going to be worse at. Even if I was good for me, I was still going to be worse at, just because I have a longer range of motion to cover, or it's just more work for me to do a certain amount of work. For like, I'm not going to spend as much time, say, on like heavy barbell cycling or yoke carries or like or legless rope climbs or stuff like that, or handstand walk or lunges, because I know that's where I can actually cover ground. But maybe I need to spend like an exponential amount of time on like burpee variations and box jump variations, and like maybe I don't need to do so many wall balls, but I need to do single arm dumbbell overhead squats and squat snatch and stuff like that. And so I started to register a little bit more of like, what do I actually need to do to individualize like my journey to me, as opposed to the ideal CrossFit athlete, because I need to put more work into these areas than even someone who's weak at them, because even if I get really good for me, it's going to take me a longer time to do it. And that's when I actually started to realize that, and I'll joke with this with Emma as well, because it would, like, say, thoracic mobility and overhead mobility was something that I really struggled with. And I worked on it for years and it did really improve. But it would literally take me like 20 minutes to get into a position where I could do a single arm dumbbell overhead squat. And Emma could wake up first thing in the morning and pick up a dumbbell and do an overhead squat. And I'm thinking like, it takes me 20 minutes to get into this position. I haven't even done any training yet. I'm just trying to literally squat this bloody dumbbell. And Emma's, by this point, could have done the piece. She's finished. She's moving on to something else. And when I look at all the, like, some other aspects of training as well, that I just found like really difficult versus some areas that I found really easy. So for instance, say CP battery stuff, where you're having to cycle like a very heavy barbell for multiple reps, I would always come top 5 in the world on those workouts, whether it be like in a semi-final, quarter-final, or like at the competition. From never work, like I never did CP battery stuff. I would basically just try and work my maximal strength, and I would do like conditioning things. But actually cycling like a heavy barbell for high reps is something I very rarely ever did. But I always come to competition and that would be no problem. I'd win it. Same things like legless rope climbs, pegboard, that kind of stuff. I would rarely ever work on it, but it would always be there and I would win. So, and then you've got other things that I worked on a lot that I would just really struggle with. And I think that I started to realize that maybe I'm in the beginning when the sport was younger and it was less competitive, and I could I could like shore up these areas that I wasn't so good at, or be really good in other areas and make up for it. I could get along and I could still be like in the top. But now as the sport has moved on and you're getting more of these athletes come in that have been training for longer, they're better built for it, and they have just been in like they've grown up with the sport. So they know like all of those little tips and tricks from day one. I just couldn't keep up anymore. And like being a body type that wasn't suited for the sport began to like take too much of a toll on the training and on the performance. It also added to the lack of enjoyment as well.
Yeah, one of the questions was like as a taller athlete, how you sort of prepare and how you influence programming, but I think you've touched on all of it there. How talking about programming then and piecing these things together, and let's just talk generally, CrossFit obviously being the thing that I think popularized sort of mixed modality training and the ability to get really strong and get really fit at the same time. Obviously now high rocks has become a big thing. Hybrid training's become a big thing. What are the sort of principles that really work for you in terms of programming, putting this together, having an off season, things to work on that maybe for the sort of general listener that's looking to maybe build a bit of strength, put in a bit of size, build their fitness, any kind of general principles that stood true in CrossFit that we've been able to now adapt and adopt in broader fitness?
So I'm going to say a few things that people are going to hear and they'll be like, oh, boring. No,
I think that's where we need to, keep banging that drum.
Yeah, it's that the boring stuff is the stuff that works, unfortunately. And by boring, I think that like so one of the principles is a saying that I like, which sounds a little bit like counterintuitive when you're trying to actually like you're working hard to get better, but the slowest way is the fastest way to go. Like the training that is going to get you the results tomorrow or next week or next month is likely going to be of an intensity or require a level of work that is not going to be sustainable. The best athletes are not the ones that train to be the best that they can be tomorrow, next week, or next month. The best athletes are the ones that are focused on long-term development. So instead of choosing like a method of training or an intensity of training or a program that just runs you into the ground, and if you can survive it, then you're going to be great. But in a year's time, you're going to have so many riddled with injuries and so overtrained that you don't want to even do the sport anymore. That's not going to work. Like choose the form of training, choose the coach, choose the program, choose the intensity of your next workout and like your weeks of training that is going to be a sustainable way of doing things so that you can get better like week after week and month after month, which may mean that you are not necessarily as good as you could be in like you're not going to be your best in a month's time, but when you compound those like months and years of training, like that is how you get to your full potential by doing something that's sustainable. I think we said about the sustainability and like basically like the long-term aspect of it, which should together.
That's perfect. And I think that's probably where, particularly, let's use high rocks as the example, because that's maybe a little bit more easy for people to get their head around as to what high rocks feels like. I don't think people will actually understand what it feels like to compete at the games across a weekend. Many people come into it without the prerequisite body of work around running or the prerequisite movement efficiency. Yeah. Even in wall balls and isolation, let alone wall balls once there's fatigue in the legs. You mentioned there about understanding that at 6'2" in your weight, it wasn't legless rope climbs you need to work on, it's the burpee variations. And I'm sure you literally had sessions upon sessions of burpees in isolation with different hand placements, ways of getting down, getting up, getting onto a box, off the box. And people come into high rocks and just mash it all together and just go after it. So yes, playing the long game is the key part of this. But then how would you mix the concurrent training or the uncomplementary ways to train for both, let's just use strength and conditioning, and training some of those things in isolations versus piecing it together and doing workouts that seem fun?
So first and foremost is specificity, making sure that the training that you are doing is actually directed to what you want to get better at. And as a general principle, when you are closer to the event that you are doing, you want to be training more specifically to that event. But the training that is the most specific for the event is the best for you to do if you have a very limited amount of time, or if you are very close to the event and you're essentially like sharpening up to get ready for what you're going to compete in. But it's not necessarily the best way to develop all of the aspects that go into that performance over a long period of time. And in simple terms, the best way to get good at high rocks is not to just do a high rocks event every other day. The best way to do that is to take those individual aspects that you need to get better at, the running, the rowing, the skiing, every single element, like the sandbag lunge, the wall ball, the burpee board jump, the sled push and pull, like these are all things, the farmer's carry, like these are all things that you need to look at individually and say, what training can I do to get better at this individual thing? The best way to get better at running is not necessarily to do intervals of just the 1K distance. It's not necessarily the best way to get better at, for instance, the sandbag lunge. If you get to the sandbag lunge and your legs are blowing up, great, you can do run onto sandbag lunge onto run, and that will be like, that's probably going to improve your performance. But if your issue is that your legs are blowing up, is that because you haven't necessarily, the local musculature, quads, glutes, hamstrings don't have the structures in place where you can actually take in as much oxygen as you need, and then you are building up a lot more waste products, or you can't clear lactate fast enough. Like these are all things that you can work on individually away from the competition, so that when you come back to it, you realize that, oh, my issue on sandbag lunges wasn't actually the sandbag lunge. It was that I was running at an intensity that was too high for me to actually clear any lactate. So then I got to the sandbag lunge and I was already destroyed. So now I improve this aspect of my running. I come to the sandbag lunge and I'm better prepared for it. I'm in a better position, so I'm going to perform better. So the specificity is both, like, it's a bit of a double-edged sword, because if you go too specific, you miss out on developing the individual aspects that you could do better in isolation. But then if you go too far away from the specificity, you then lose sight of what you're actually training for. And I think this is something that's easier to manage with high rocks, where you have the same race every time. So you know exactly what you're competing in, so that you can take that away and train all year round and plan, like, what am I going to do for my skiing to make sure that I can hold this skiing pace that I know I need to hold on the day? Like, what am I going to do for local like leg endurance to know that I'm going to be able to handle that combination of the run, the wall ball, and the run, the sandbag, and the wall balls. But when you have, like, say, CrossFit, where all the events are very different, and they're both different between competitions, within competitions, and throughout the season, everything could be argued for being specific or non-specific. So even like your warm-ups could eventually be, that style could be in a workout. Like everything that you train essentially becomes sport specific. So I think with high rocks, you've got a much easier time with being able to really like target your training towards what you need to be doing, because you know what the test is going to be.
It begs the question, how do you program for CrossFit?
Yeah, I don't know, really. Just...
Do you think you're, because again, going back to how I started the episode with the introduction, your reputation comes as someone who's extremely diligent, extremely disciplined, is in the detail and really cares. Do you think, because you brought that to your coaching practice, and you said you've programmed for the same amount of time that you have competed, do you think you are as good as a competitor because of how you view the training and the programming, the detail? Or do you think you're as good as a coach and programmer because of the way you showed up and practiced what you preach in competition?
Yeah, this is a conversation Emma and I have had many times, because I think it's different for. So I am someone who, I really like being invested in the coaching process as the programming process as an athlete. Like, I like to look into the program and understand the reasoning behind everything that's in there, so that then I can direct my efforts exactly how they should be, and I can feel far more like willing to do all of the training, because I know that everything in there is what I need to do. And I take enjoyment, I take pleasure in understanding that. And I think maybe that is partly because I'm also alongside that a coach and I program as well. But I do know that for some athletes, they do like to just like they don't want to know about the details. Like, for them, it's just like you just point them in the direction and they go. I think for me, if I did that, if someone tried to do that with me as a coach, or like writing me a program, I would find it difficult to really fully invest in that and get everything out of myself and believe in the training. But then conversely, if there are other athletes that they just want to be told, point in the direction and tell them to go, if you do try to involve them too much in the details, like, it just pulls them out of that athlete head. They get confused, they get distracted, and it starts to actually like reduce their effort. So I do think it's different for different people, but I know which one worked best for me. And I do think that being an athlete that was involved in the programming and the coaching has definitely made me a far better coach and programmer today, because there are a lot of great coaches out there within CrossFit, High Rocks, and all sports that have never played or competed to the highest level. But they have enough experience and spent enough time in the sport and around athletes to really to like deeply understand what it is that they are asking athletes to do. But then on the other hand, are athletes who have competed in the sport, and there's something that you get from competing, and like not just competing as in like going to a competition, going through a weekend of competition, but actually competing as in like the day-to-day grind of being an athlete and understanding what it is like to wake up sore and tired and have to push yourself through a day of training that you now don't want to do. You want to have a day off, even though you love the sport and you want to get to where you go, and you don't want to do this anymore because you're just so sore and so tired that you would rather just stay in bed or just take a damn like day off and not think about the sport. There's something that you get from that you can't get from it any other way, apart from if you've actually been through it yourself, for like day after month after year in the sport, grinding away. And I think that has given me a level of understanding that I can then apply to the programming so I can understand what is going to be sustainable, or as close to sustainable as possible for an athlete. And then when they do struggle, I can understand like what actually can be changed here to help this athlete get through this process. What is important? How would I feel in this position? What can I get them to understand to perhaps get the most out of this training, despite the fact that they are not feeling 100%, and like get them to encourage them to like look through the long-term process and get that like what's happening here doesn't matter hugely if you can just like stay on the path and get around the obstacles. So things like that, I think you can't really get unless you've been an athlete.
It's quickly segue into that what you said there about waking up fatigued and sore. How much of that is kind of positive and will lead to good adaptation versus going down a path of overtraining, injury, burnout? How do you distinguish between the two? Because that's always something. We spoke about this at breakfast. Like, you know, I'm probably training for 10 hours a week at max at the moment. I find it really tough to recover. I'm pretty diligent with my sleep and my nutrition, etc. When I think about the volume of, particularly, you know, athletes on Instagram now, like 20-hour training weeks, I'm like, geez, I mean, that of kids and other things maybe, but well, at least that's my excuse. I think about CrossFitters, the volume they had to try and do, and actually the style of training. We spoke about this, you know, the lifting, the jumping, the bounding. Surely every day you're waking up feeling pretty beat up.
Yeah, I think you asked earlier about the how do you program for CrossFit, and we spoke about the specificity, but I think another part of it is also learning to kill two birds with one stone, as it were, like touch on the things that have the most carryover to everything else. So like we said, that like everything potentially could be specific to the CrossFit event because anything could be programmed. Good CrossFit programming is going to give you exposure to loads of different skills throughout the week so that you can touch on those skills frequently enough to keep them sharp, because the degradation of skill acquisition is much faster than like the physiological adaptations like muscle endurance or strength or whatever. So it's important that you touch on those skills frequently. And you also want to choose things that then have the most carryover to other things as well. So you touch on the really specific things, but you always keep like your snatches and your back squats and your chest to bar in, right? Because those are the things that are going to have lots of carryover to other movements. Now, the downside of that is that you are constantly pushing your body in many directions all the time. So take, for instance, powerlifting. I have 3 movements that I have to think about: squat, bench, and deadlift. Accessory movements that I do generally make me feel better. So my body really only has to adapt to doing like 3 movement pathways, heavy and intensely. That's not a lot of directions to have to push your body, which means that the kind of like the niggles and the injuries that you get are like far less, especially if you can program sensibly and complement it with your accessory work. Now add in the Olympic lifts, snatch and clean and jerk. Then add in all of like the monostructural things: rowing, skiing, cycling, running, swimming. Then add in all gymnastic movements. So you've got so many movements now that you are doing either heavy, high volume, or high intensity it's a lot of tissues and a lot of directions that your body is being pushed to then potentially pick up more injuries, more niggles and more pains. It's not like you're hunting for problems, but when you push yourself so hard doing so many different things, the little niggles and injuries that a gym master might get and a weightlifter might get and a power lifter and a runner and a cyclist and a swimmer, like you get them all. You don't get them as intensely because you're not visiting the same movement pathway like as in such a volume as they are, but you do just get just a little bit, because not only while your body does adapt to what you are doing, the more you do it, it also there's like a, it's almost like a, I suppose like a U curve, right? Like the more you do it, the greater you adapt and the easier it is to visit those positions. And then you get to a point where you do so much that you then start to create niggles and injuries. And I think that it's very easy to basically end up on like the tail end of that curve where you're starting to get to the niggles and injuries on like 100 movements. And so inevitably you wake up every morning and like somewhere is sore, somewhere is niggly, like pain. And part of your job as an athlete, as a coach, as a programmer, and working in between is to learn to manage those niggles and injuries, because you have to train so many things so frequently. And we are not perfectly built to be able to squat, clean and jerk, handstand walk, rope climb, run. Somewhere is going to be something that our body doesn't really want to do and isn't so like well built to do. So it's about, part of it is learning to manage those injuries and manage those pain, which really comes down to understanding yourself as an athlete, which comes down to which you need to have experience in the sport doing to then be able to know what works best for you.
Yeah, again, I think the take home there is the immersing yourself in the process and actually being connected to the process and the feeling of your body, because I think that is that's something I think a lot of people lose at any level of kind of training and competing, is they're just kind of on that hamster wheel, just doing it because that's what they think they should be doing, and not really mindful of how they're feeling, how they're adapting, what their performance looks like. Are there any ways in which they could measure perceived output on any given day to start to auto-regulate how they should maybe look to, okay, on this day, I need to just push because I can, versus, you know, I've had consecutive days now of feeling this way. Weights on the bar are coming down, movement quality is diminishing. Okay, maybe I need to deload.
And just, to that point that you've just made there, obviously during this time, Emma and I spent probably cumulatively like literal years within CrossFit boxes training. And so we are also privy to what everybody else does in their training sessions, right? Because we're there for so long. We see people come in the morning and train, lunch classes, open gym. And something that we often notice are people who want to be good at the sport, who see how much training we do, and then automatically think that they need to be doing a lot of training as well in order to get better. And I think that misunderstanding comes from a misunderstanding of stimulus and adaptation. We're trying to accomplish, we're trying to be good at so many different movements. So that takes a certain amount of time to train to get good at all of those movements. But we're also trying to compete at a very high level, which means what we need to do to be good at those movements requires a lot of training. If you are at a lower level, if you're just getting into the sport, if you're not very competitive, you don't need to be great at every single movement and training every single movement all the time in order to get better as an athlete. Both because the level isn't as high, but also because most competitions, like lower level competitions, aren't going to have some of the very niche high skill movements that you then have to visit often. And secondly, the more training that you do, the more resistant to training volume and potentially intent, or training volume at least, you become. So what it took, to make it really simple, the number of rowing intervals that we used to maybe need to do in order to get an adaptation is less than what we have to do now. So basically that means that if you're an amateur, you're just getting into the sport, or you're in the lower levels of competition, it's not only okay that you are only training once a day, or you're not training in huge volumes, it's good. You want to stay at that point where you're doing just enough training to get an adaptation and get better, and then keep it there. And then when that stops working, you start to plateau. Then that's when you introduce a little bit more training or a little bit more intense training stimulus, and then you get the adaptation, you stay there and you keep going. And that's how that gradual, slow increase of volume over time is what is sustainable. And that's what actually gets you to your main training goals. Going in there twice a day, battering yourself for 4 hours because you see the people on YouTube, like the top CrossFit athletes doing that, is not going to be sustainable, and that's not what's going to get you to their best. And if you told some of these athletes that, like, because that love the sport and love to do the sport, if you told them, hey, you could train 2 hours less and get better, they would all do it. Nobody's going in the gym and doing an extra 2 hours of training for fun at that point because you're fucking knackered. So while you have that very low like stimulus threshold, enjoy it and take advantage of it, because if you do want to stay in the sport for a long time and you do want to get better, there will be a time when you can't do that much training anymore. You have to do more. So take advantage of that now.
That's really cool to hear as well, because I think like people appreciate maybe that notion in, like, say, typical bodybuilding program with, I guess, kind of fairly easy to understand progressions where you're like, okay, if we've got back squats in the program and we're just going to eke out as much. We're not even going to worry about whether it's 4 weeks, 8 weeks, 12 weeks. We're just going to keep going until progress is no longer seen with the back squat. And I think most people that are looking to, improve muscle mass, for example, can maybe get their head around that and maybe not get bored about it because I just want to get stronger and build muscle. When you apply it to like CrossFit, people probably, it's good for them to hear that, consistent movements, particularly because the selection, the movement kind of library is going to be smaller by default, as you've mentioned, because what they're looking to achieve doesn't require all of those movements yet. Or the way in which they measure their progress shouldn't be how many muscle ups they can do yet if they can't yet do whatever it may be, strict pull-ups, for example. That might not be the right example here, but you get the idea. That's really cool to hear, because I do think people think that CrossFit just needs to be chaos and variety and all these different movements straight out the gate, whereas good sound strength and conditioning principles are kind of interchangeable across every athletic endeavor, whether it's high rocks, CrossFit, or field-based sports.
I think it's one of those sports that, because of the variety, you do get, unfortunately, people that like you throw enough shit at a wall and some of it is going to stick, and like you can go about that, and you probably have a good time doing it. Like, it's fun for you to just train random stuff all the time. But if you do want to be the best that you can be and you want to use your time efficiently, strength and conditioning principles still apply. And if you look at the best athletes, the best training programs, like, they are still instilling the strength and conditioning principles once you like break it down and find your way through like the chaos of the CrossFit programming. And what you say about like you spoke about there with hypertrophy, that is also within bodybuilding, especially within more recent years where you've got more science-based bodybuilding education and advance and advice. It's again that focus on what is going to be sustainable for the long term. Like, if you are, I think a lot of the bodybuilding advice from like 10, 20 years ago primarily came from the biggest bodybuilders, which were enhanced and still are enhanced athletes. When you are enhanced, you can sustain a much higher volume and a much higher intensity of training than you can do when you're not enhanced. And that means that then when people start taking that advice and applying it to themselves, not only are they training harder than is necessary in order to get gains, but they're training so hard that they then put themselves at a higher injury risk as well. And if you just understand that, like, this is the amount of training that you need to do in order to stimulate an adaptation, and then gradually increase that over time, you'll see more gains, less niggles. You probably enjoy yourself more and have a longer and more fulfilling career and journey through the sport.
Coming away from CrossFit and talking about powerlifting then, which is what you've thrown yourself into, probably to scratch that competitive itch and just to, I think you alluded to at breakfast, really focus on top end strength, which is something you never really had the opportunity to because of having to train for so many different things. Squat, bench and deadlift are, they're kind of the basics in strength training. What's your goals? So kind of a couple of parts of this question. Your goals within powerlifting, or why do you choose powerlifting when you're coming away from CrossFit? And then also, how beneficial are those powerlifting movements and then the complementary accessories around it to just like general fitness, whether it is CrossFit or anything else?
Okay, so reason why I gravitated toward powerlifting, first of all, I just really like the movements. I think of all the strength movements that I've done in CrossFit, I think it's mainly like the Olympic lifts and then the power lifts. And I feel the Olympic lifts I enjoyed like the speed and the athleticism that is required to execute a snatch or a clean and jerk. But something about just like the raw grinding strength that is necessary to squat, bench and deadlift as much as possible was like, that's what attracts me to those movements more. And I appreciate speed and I appreciate skill. But when you remove those two, and again, it's just down to like grindy work, that's the part that I enjoy, you know? And I think maybe that also goes back to like rowing, for instance. Like there's an ample amount of technique, but it's really like, it's about who can like grind and work the most. So that's why I really like those movements. I think that for my body, in terms of like where I am naturally like stiff or mobile or strong or weak, those movements just feel good for me. I think that during CrossFit, because of maybe just, I don't know if it's like sporting history or my genetics, I find it quite difficult to adapt to different things at the same time. So if I use, again, Emma for an example, she's great at like, she can get stronger, more conditioned at the same time, like steadily has over time. And that's probably down to her genetics, and that's probably the genetics of most elite level CrossFitters. Like they have the ability to be able to push their body in different directions and respond to it and make gains over time. Whereas I found that I really had to isolate one thing and then really bring down the level of something else in order to get that same adaptation. And more so with the strength and the conditioning, which would just naturally rise. The strength was something that I really had to work hard on to improve. So then to step away from CrossFit, that's the thing that I feel like I've put the most work into and got like the least reward out of. And so now a part of it was I enjoy the movements, but I also I am really interested and excited to explore how strong can I get when I don't have the interference of so much conditioning and gymnastics stopping, like interfering and stopping with some of those adaptations. And again, hindsight is useful, and now when I'm in this mindset where I'm in more of a mindset of exploration and interest and discovery into what I'm capable of, I realized that had I had this mindset when I was competing, that again would have led to a longer and more fulfilling career. Maybe not necessarily even longer, but just more fulfilling. I probably would have potentially reached a higher level because I would have enjoyed it more, because I would have been approaching it from the sense of like, instead of like, I should be better and I need to get better, it would have been more a case of like, I wonder how good I can get. Like, can I get better? What can I achieve in this like conditioning area, gymnastics of strength? So yeah, it's another mindset I've gained now from powerlifting and exploring that. It's really nice to be an amateur again. It's very nice to be at like the lowest level of competition, which I most definitely am in Sweden when I'm getting beaten by like 59 kilo men. But it's also nice to take. It's also nice to take like I've still had an extensive sporting career, and I've still reached like the highest level of a sport. And there's a lot I can take from that and apply to powerlifting. And I naturally apply it anyway with very little effort. Like the attention that I pay to detail, like the few meets that I've gone to, it's so easy to do because I've had to have so many factors to consider in CrossFit competition. Whereas now I literally go up there, I know what movements I'm doing, how many reps I'm going to do, exactly what weight I want to hit, and what the movement standard is. And there are people like not meeting depth on squats and like jumping the press command on bench. And I'm like, man, like this literally couldn't be any easier. Like imagine trying to do the same movement, but 50 more reps when you can barely and your judge is shouting the reps and giving you no reps sometimes. You've got 9 other guys in other lanes. You've got the fans screaming, you've got music on. And then after this, you've got like another 10 movements. It's it feels like lazy almost, the sport now. But that's, but I really enjoy it. And, as far as like the value of those movements for everyone, I think that they cover 3 major movement pathways that are at the basis of how we as humans move, but also how like other movements that we are required to perform in life, and that also relate to other movements in sport as well. The ability to push yourself off of your chest, or even if you're lying down, to push yourself up off of the floor. The ability to push someone away from you, or an object away from you. So again, if you yourself, you do jiu-jitsu, you appreciate like the value of like the strength to be able to push, but then also the value of the strength to be able to pull and grip, which if you're training the bench, you're also training pulling as well to complement that, the push. So then that's going to be very beneficial for any combat sports or anything that involves grappling. Then deadlift is probably like the most obvious one, right? Like you hinge, you need to pick something up off of the floor, and that's probably one of the movements that are is like that bending over to pick something up off of the floor is probably one of the movements that's most common for people to complain of like injuring themselves, right? And it's not necessarily to say that like everyone needs to deadlift heavy, but say that you've got one person they can deadlift 150 kilos. You've got another person who can deadlift 70 kilos. One of them's going to injure their back picking up a heavy shopping bag off the floor. Which one is it most likely to be, right? If you just give yourself that buffer of strength, it makes all of your tasks in daily life a lot less risky, a lot less chance to hurt yourself. But it also means that as you get older and naturally muscle breakdown becomes greater, you give yourself this buffer of strength that means you can stay healthy and strong for many years after, even if you don't retain that 150 kilo deadlift. Like the fact that you just had it and you're working to keep it and you're working to train that movement pathway is going to make that movement pathway in life so much more manageable. And then squat, I think one of the number one predictor is I can't remember the term, mortality or longevity, but basically at risk of death or when you're going to die, was VO2 max. And I think second was leg strength. And if it wasn't second, it's definitely very high up there. And I think that makes sense because they're very complementary, right? Like how essentially fit you are in the rawest form, and then your ability to stand up, to climb upstairs, to carry things potentially, to run, is also going to be a big contributor to like how well you're going to be able to live life. And so I think the squat is another big one, another like foundational movement for life and for sport as well. And also because in our daily life, because as we are sitting down now, we've got that like 90-degree angle at the hip, 90-degree angle, we're thereabouts at the knee. And we spend so much time of our adult life in that position, it's very easy to lose those ranges of motion. And it's not nice to be able to lose any range of motion in your body. Like you want the ability to be able to like squat down and pick something up off the floor. You want to be able to potentially like squat down and like play with your kids. And if you never visit that range of motion, you leave yourself at risk of losing it. And if you do visit that range of motion, but you never visit it under load, you put yourself in a higher injury risk position when you do visit it. So to kind of like tick all boxes, hedge your bets would be to just load up the movement, go through a full range of motion, and then you retain that range of motion, you're strong in it. And again, that's going to contribute to like longevity and quality of life later on.
I love hearing people talk about fitness and what it means to them and just like their articulation of bringing it to life. I think this is why it's so exciting to bring you into the MARCHON coaching team. I kind of introed you at the top, and that was off the few conversations we've had over Zoom and what I've got to know of you through secondhand information. The time I've spent with you today at breakfast and during this podcast, it really gives me confidence that it's going to be an incredible journey together with having you on the coaching team, being able to tap into your mind and the way you think about fitness and you be able to impart your knowledge on both as an athlete, a competitor, but also the discipline that you've built over all these years. What attracted? I know I came to you kind of in a headhunting type manner. David, do you want this job? But what attracts you about MARCHON, and what do you hope to bring to, not necessarily the methodology, but I guess just like the programming? I'm not talking detail here, but you know, what do you bring to the company, and what do you want to try and tap into, and maybe explore more for yourself as well in terms of this stage of your career as both an athlete, but probably more relevant as a coach? And I think we'll use that as kind of our closing bit.
So I think what's attracted me, apart from you headhunting me, it is quite obvious to me early on, and it's become more apparent as I've learned more about yourself and Charlie, the rest of the MARCHON team, and also like the company itself, and how you put yourselves out on media and like how you communicate with members, that you are clearly, it's more than just a training app or a team or a group of people working together in a company. Like, it's very clear that you're trying to build something here, something like all encapsulating the way you can provide a service that spans everything from powerlifting, from strength, all the way like through the hybrid sports to more endurance specific, that you're trying to create a service that can help people meet any strength conditioning goal, no matter where on the spectrum that it is. And also create a team of people who are, it almost feels like a team of leaders, right? And it does feel it feels special compared to to other potential like coaching brands or teams that I've worked with before, because it's clear that the goal here is that the bar is set quite high in terms of like what you're trying to create. And I think that's something that's attracted me as well. I think that in terms of what I would like out of MARCHON, is to learn more about something that I'm very bad with is, as we spoke about at breakfast, is that I feel I have the knowledge and the experience to help people achieve their health and their fitness goals, and those who are already on that journey to help make that journey smoother and faster, more efficient. I'm not so good at communicating that. And I think that's something that MARCHON does very well through the app, through your coaching in gyms and through the app, on social media in general. Very good at capturing the audience attention and giving them valuable, meaningful information and inviting them to be part of a community of people who are on this fitness journey together, as opposed to just like a quick fix that's not really going to solve your problem. And so that's something that I want to get better at and learn how to communicate better with people. And what I feel I can bring is probably like everything that we've discussed in this podcast, which is like my experience as an athlete, being in the trenches, going through what has worked, what has not worked, and then being able to take that and bring it to other members of the team to help within their own coaching of their own aspects of MARCHON, to our members that are on the Compete program, on the Perform program, or any road program on MARCHON. Because I think that there are athletes they go through their athlete journey, and because they're not that way inclined in terms of like invested in the process, they come away from it not maybe picking up as many of the coaching skills as they could. Or there's athletes that are particularly gifted and they just sail through movements and they learn things really quickly, and like it's not tough for them to do that. Like where they put their effort in is the work. Whereas the good side of that is that you go through athletic career and like maybe you don't encounter as many hurdles. You've got different types of hurdles. Whereas for myself, like I did find like the skill acquisition of things very difficult. I did find it quite difficult to adapt to doing certain things. And when you find things difficult, you then learn the process of solving those problems, which you can then take as a skill to apply to other people. So for all of the things that I've really struggled with, I'm thankful because I now have the skill to solve that problem that I can then apply to other people and help make that problem less of a hurdle and the solution come much, much faster.
So powerful. I mean, it's so rare to find someone in fitness who's competed at your level, but also thinks so critically and diligently about programming and helping others. So I consider myself very lucky with having you join us. I know I've talked very highly of you, but I mean everything I've said so far. I think the team are very excited about having you on board. We've built a team of leaders, as you've alluded to, and people that have specific skill sets in different topics around fitness. And the ability to everyone sit around the table, challenge each other's thoughts, beliefs, and just level up and be so open to it. It's something it's been very special for us, but also enables us to keep moving at the pace in which we want to, and also reach the potential that I believe we have. So I'm sure we'll do a V2 of the podcast, but it's been very good getting to know you. Hopefully the listeners have enjoyed it. They'll be seeing lots more of you. And thank you very much.
Thank you very much for having me.